Hello, hello. Welcome to my little corner of the world. We're going to talk about vertical slice architecture, and we're going to talk about how to use it with a new collection of libraries that we like to call the ImmediatePlatform. I'm going to tell you up front that I tend to be a little bit more interactive with my presentation. So I've got the Discord window up. So feel free to ask questions along the way, and I will be glad to answer kind of as we go along. But until then, let's go ahead and dig in. One of the things that I've gone through over the last few years, and I grew up in the clean architecture world. I grew up in the 3-tier architecture. I grew up in the, hey, let's do everything in order. Let's have layers. Let's have everything be perfect. Lots of abstraction. And one of the things I found along the way is that a lot of that stuff kind of got in my way. So when I look at both vertical slice architecture and with the new library, the new ImmediatePlatform libraries, there's really kind of a few goals that we go through. The first one is keep it simple, stupid. That's one of the things that I really try to get to is what can I get done? What do I need to do? And not focus on the complexity up front. I think a lot of times I get through trying to get everything perfect. I try to get everything, whatever, and keeping it simple has gotten me a lot further. Second thing is you ain't gonna need it. One of the things there is that, talk about it a lot on the server. If you followed me at all when we're talking in the web or the database area, talking about adding repositories, talking about adding layers is, okay, what is that actually going to get you? What is that actually going to benefit you? Are you going to need that in the near future? And one of the quotes I wrote down is, it's better to get something done and have the ability to refactor it than to spend forever building the perfect system and never get it completed. And that's the idea there is that we can spend 3 years building the perfect system with all of the abstraction, or we can spend 1 year, get it done, and we can move on. And then if things slow us down, we can come back, revisit. We'll have more time. We'll have more resources. We'll have more ability to do it. The picture there is Larry the Cable Guy, a great American comedian. Get her done. Or I see in the Discord, Tomato. Get her done. So let's talk about the history of vertical slice architecture. There's a video I've linked here. I will put the link in the Discord. This is a talk by Jimmy Bogard. He is, oops, I did not copy that right. So this is Jimmy Bogard. He introduced what he called the solid architecture. And what this was is kind of a step away from clean architecture into using the solid architecture topic. So separating a class by feature, extending OCP, LCO, all of these different things. Oh, there you go. Thank you, TV. So go ahead and watch that at a later date doing that. But the idea there is that we're going to follow these principles, not just on an individual layer, but also as an architecture. So when we talk about doing the domain code, we can do single responsibility, single class per feature. We're talking about separating this stuff, and then started adding cross-cutting concerns like authorization, authentication, logging, those kinds of things. The biggest thing is that it ultimately boils down to a simpler architecture that things can get done quickly. Then we move on. He talked a little bit further in 2018, moving to introducing in a blog post the vertical slice architecture. And this is where he really kind of formalized this idea of vertical slices, separating out, taking advantage of CQRS, where you do get methods that are safe, idempotent, that only do reading of the data. They never modify data. Posts are unsafe. They modify data, separating them, separating all of the code for each of them. Using slicing to make it easy to modify code. using testing as a kind of as a refactor step, simplifying the layers. So rather than having 5 layers, 10 layers, focus on simplifying it together so that the code can instead be combined, richer, and do kind of the same, do all things, and then adding integration tests so that instead of trying to mock everything and test everything individually, write integration tests that do everything, and that way you have confidence in the system that is put together. Let's see if TV wants to copy the link there, or here, let me see if I can do this again. Copy, paste to plain text. Oh, there we go. So let's talk about what vertical slice architecture actually is. So normally, when we talk about these larger architectures, in-tier or clean architecture, what you look at, okay, we're going to build our database project, we're going to build our domain project, we're going to build our application project, we're going to build our UI project, and we're going to identify what the layers are between them. We're going to make sure that the connections between them are correct. With vertical slice architecture, instead, what you do is you focus on building slices of code that belong together. So instead, you would say, okay, I'm going to grab all of the code for modifying an order, and I'm going to put all of that stuff into an order feature. I'm going to take a look at all the code that modifies a customer. I'm going to put that into a customer feature. I'm going to have all the stuff for modifying vendors and put that in the vendor feature. And the idea there is that instead of separating things by layer, you say, okay, I'm going to create handlers that focus on doing one thing for a customer. So I want to query all the data, a list of all the customers. Okay, that handler is going to do everything it needs to do. It's going to live in the customer feature. It's going to query the data. It's going to access the database directly. And we're not going to have all of these interfaces. We're not going to have all of these separations in between them. Now, one of the things, in saying all of this, one of the misconceptions is that vertical slice architecture means that you can only have one project. That's not really what it means at all. That's a common result, is that you only have one project. But vertical slice architecture, you can have multiple projects. But the better way to separate them is to have a project for an order project and have a customer project. These features that we start talking about, if they get large enough, we start creating separate projects just for that feature. And then all of the code for all of that is together, and it can be isolated if it needs to. And this would eventually, if you need to graduate from a monolith to a modular microservice architecture, you can start to pull out individual projects and moving it over. Head on Fire brings up a good misconception. You cannot have abstractions. That's correct. You can have abstractions. The thing is not about removing abstraction. The thing is about identifying what makes sense. Does it make sense to have an abstraction, or you ain't going to need it? If you ain't going to need it, then get her done. Just put it all in one file, put it together, and move on. Otherwise, if it does make sense, then yes, write a. So I do not tend to write abstractions for database stuff because I'd rather just focus on an integration test, do it all at once, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, if I'm focusing on a third-party API that has limits and costs and so on and so forth, and then I might add an abstraction for that and say, okay, I'm going to have my unit tests focus on the abstraction, and then the production focuses on the real one. But then that becomes something that I evaluate on an as-needed basis. I don't say I'm always going to have an abstraction. Don't use it. Yeah. So the database, and that's a good question from Yonder on the database side. The database belongs to all features. So what I usually do is I usually have, and this is true with Entity Framework, this is true with Link2DB, this is true with Dapper, or whatever you want. What I do is I focus on the database as a separate folder. So I say, at the root, we'll get into folder structure in a few minutes, but I focus on a database folder that everybody can access. So all the features can access the database. There's no limit on what tables a particular feature can access. They all have full access to the database because the database becomes a shared foundation that everything can access. Because again, let's focus on getting things done. And database is really kind of a general concept that everybody needs to rely on. Is it a bad practice to put command query handler endpoint in a single file? That is a good practice, in my opinion. That's what I do. And we'll go through some of that in a little bit. So as we talk about this architecture, what we look at here is this. We have our use cases, we have our features, we have our domain, and then we have our cross-cutting concern. And the idea there is that, so use case is a single endpoint. It's hey, I want to query the customer. I want to query the open order. I want to query, whatever I need to, or I need to save an order. The feature would be everything within a particular concept. Some people like to do it at the entity level. I think that's a little too narrow, in my opinion. I tend to do it, if you look at it more along the lines of like business concepts. So again, like orders, vendors, customers, purchase orders, AP, AR, those kinds of high level concepts, and whatever belongs in that general concept. It's a little bit loosey-goosey, but part of the premise is that we as developers are kind of have that power to make that decision. And the other thing is that I don't think we should be afraid of refactoring if we say, oh, you know what, we put it here, but now this feature needs to be split up because it's too big. Well, okay, let's, if we have our integration testing built on the endpoints and not on the implementation, then we can say, okay, I'm going to move the code for this endpoint to another feature because it makes more sense, and I can still trust that the system is working as a whole. And then within the features, you have domain logic, and that's going to be shared business logic. So if you have your handlers, then the domain would end up being things like services, where, okay, we're going to have a lot of common code that every handler is using within a particular feature. It starts to get promoted from handler to the services, and then so they can be used by everything there. And then the last thing is cross-cutting concern. So these are things that are more abstract. They're not really by feature. They're not really things that a feature has any. They're not business logic really. They're really more, hey, how do we get things done? But we need to get them done for all handlers or all features. And that would be stuff, cross-cutting concern. So things would be like, so cross-cutting concern would be like logging, authorization. If you want to do something that, not necessarily at the ASP.NET level, but just at a, or even if you do a WPF application, you have a vertical slice architecture, you can move your authorization for doing certain things as a cross-cutting concern, and then all of the different concerns with, all the different handlers can then inherit those concerns. What does domain mean in this concept? So domain would be either things like So domain would be more of a things that are shared. So all of the business. Going back. So what I would put in the domain is things that are in services, things that are that don't belong to a single handler, things that are shared among multiple handlers. So that might be like, if I give you an example, if I'm working on an accounting system and I have a single handler that creates a transaction, that can be considered a domain handler because now transactions that are created by the AP system, transactions that are created by the sales order system, transactions that are, all of these other things start to depend on that one handler. That becomes a domain handler because it's a shared handler that everybody starts using, and that becomes something that's useful But in the point here is that it does become more risk if you need to edit it. And so that becomes this ebb and flow, this push and pull. Yes, the shared business logic. All right, let me, and so we start talking about coupling. One of the, that's always the key word, the business jargon is the coupling. And we've been taught for so long, I was taught for so long, how, be afraid of coupling. Don't couple things. Make sure that you always have abstractions. Make sure you always have this separation between different pieces so that you can always replace that piece if you need to. Don't be afraid of coupling. Within a particular slice, don't worry about coupling at all. If one thing is that if you need to couple between two different handlers in a single slice, you need to depend on a service, there should not be any concerns about that. What should be concerning is, or at least limiting, is coupling between slices. So if you say that I want to depend from one feature to another on a particular handler, then that would be for then that would start to raise the domain, promote from feature to domain. And so then you start to say, okay, does it make sense? Let me evaluate this. Let me take a step back and consider, is this valuable? Handlers should use EF Core directly, or whatever your ORM is. They should have access to the database directly. Repositories are something that need to be, a lot of these are ultimately going to boil down to, I think I said something the other day on the, VSA, we tend to focus on emergent complexity rather than enforced complexity. So rather than saying, hey, up front, we're going to engineer complexity and create these separations, instead, we're going to say, okay, let's do things the simple way first. Let's keep it simple, stupid. And then as things become complex, we say, okay, let's add that complexity. So a handler should rely on the database directly. If we have code that looks similar in 3 different handlers, let it look similar. If it doesn't belong to the same logic, if it doesn't belong to the same entity, if it doesn't have the same purpose, then we say, okay, let's evaluate that and let's just copy and paste it and then edit it as we need to. There's such a focus on dry, and it's possible to be over dry, and the idea would be, let's allow things to be duplicated if it makes sense, and only focus on connecting it, abstracting it if it really starts to make sense to do so. Absolutely do minimal domain, minimal abstraction. So, do abstraction, but only as necessary. And then the things that people say are VSA that are not a VSA, the one is DB, using a separate DB context per use case. That's not something that makes sense, at least in my book. Is what we do if we say, okay, we have a shared database that, shared DB context that represents the database. Everybody can access that. I saw somebody once create a separate DB context for each use case, and then you couldn't use that on, you couldn't share data, you couldn't do any of it created a lot more work and a lot more overhead. And again, the whole point is, let's keep it simple, let's get things done. And then the other thing is share no code at all for VSA purity, which again, coupling between features is not okay. That's not VSA. VSA doesn't say you can't share. VSA says that, we're going to evaluate before we share. We're going to, what is the risk? What is the consequence? Let's take our time and evaluate, does it make sense to do so? What is the use case? Use case is, to me, a use case is a single endpoint. So if I want to get a list of the customers, if I want to get a list of the open sales orders, if I want to get a list of the to-dos, those are separate use cases. A feature would be a collection of use cases. So, okay, all of the things that reference, all of the things that make sense in a customer Can a use case involve multiple features? It can. I generally would not focus on it in that context or in that language. What I would say is that a use case belongs to a feature, but it can pull data from multiple So again, the database is shared among multiple, so if I need to, so if I get a list of customers and a part of that list of customers, I want to know what their open sales order count is and what their open AR balance is, then that would still be part of the customer feature, but the query that I use to build that table would still access the AR tables and the sales order tables and the whatever tables it needs to. It would just be a mix of, okay, this use case relies on the underlying data as it needs to. Did that answer your question? Okay. And then, do I look like I appreciate that, guys. So principles. We want to be opinionated in our development loop. That is, we want to do what we need to do. We want to have opinion. We don't want to say, hey, separate between this layer and this layer. We don't want to. Instead, we're going to say, no, I'm going to get things done. I'm going to make an intentional decision to do what needs to get done. We're going to empower the developers. So the idea is that we're going to say that you as the developer have the choice to evaluate what your abstraction level is. So for this particular use case, I don't need any abstraction. For these 3 use cases, I need some level of abstraction. So I'm going to create a common handler within the feature that they rely on. And for this case, I need to have a handler that relies on, that is available for all features. It becomes a domain handler, and it's an abstraction that everybody can rely on. But it's something that that the developer can choose at the time and evaluate at the case by case. Code starts in a use case and moves all the way up, and that's what I'm talking about. So we start with a single handler that does it, and then now these other 3 handlers rely on that. Okay, that becomes a feature level handler, and now these handlers get relied on from outside the feature. Okay, that becomes a domain handler. We're going to focus on getting things done. We're going to focus on being value driven. We're going to focus on getting the business logic, doing it right, rather than focusing on the how much abstraction do we need, how much, So again, get her done. If many handlers are sharing the same logic, can I create a common service? Yes. That becomes a back and forth. It might remain as a handler that other handlers rely on, or it might move to a service. But absolutely, it's once you start to share the logic, then that starts to make sense. The promotion is not necessarily to the service. The promotion is to who is consuming it and how much risk do we have if we need to change it. Does that answer your question, Salman? Okay. So we're going to take a step back from vertical slice architecture. We're going to move into the immediate platform. So this is a new ecosystem that we have brought together. These libraries have been written by myself, Duke, Reacher, and a couple others. These are here to simplify, again, going back to keep it simple, stupid. The whole idea behind this platform is that we really want to take a lot of these abstractions, a lot of these complexities that we see in the real world and simplify it and to create a simpler system. So this is the ecosystem. At the bottom, we have the immediate.handlers. And I'll go into what these are in just a second. But immediate.handlers is the foundation that everything is built upon. And the nice thing I like about the system is that it's very plug and play. We kind of do whatever. If you want to use immediate.handler by itself and just only do that, you can do controllers. You can use fast endpoints. Then by all means, have at it. God bless you and have a good day. But we're also going to recommend immediate.apis, which is our connection for hey, Trace, go ahead and link the website while you're at it. So immediate.apis is kind of our connection from immediate.handlers to doing endpoints. Same thing on the validation side. If you have a lot of Fluent validation code, keep it. You can use that with immediate.handlers. But then we've also written immediate.validations as well. And then in the last area, this is a new library. It's still in pre-release. We're still working on it. But we've written immediate.cache, which is meant to be a protection, a layer of caching that will improve things. Do you feel like overusing effects, behavior, cause indirect magic? That's a good question, Knox. My opinion is that that's part of the beauty of immediate.handlers is that it's available for having, it's available to see. You can look in and see all of what it's doing. So you can hit F12 on a handler and you can see here's all of the behaviors that got drawn into this particular handler, and here are all the calls that it's going to make as part of the process. So let's dig into each of these because I talked about what they, how they connect, but let's talk about what they are. So immediate.handler is an implementation of the command dispatch pattern. The most common example that everybody would be familiar with is the mediator library, which is also a good, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of overlap between mediator and immediate.handler. The biggest difference is that immediate.handler, instead of relying on a single iMediator interface that everything goes to, where you now have this layer of separation between the caller and the callee, now you have a direct connection. So as you can see on the right here, we have our code. We're creating a get item handler. And again, this is just dummy code, nothing fancy. We create the class, we create the query and the response. We handle our, we create our handler. Oh, and there's my kitty. And then we mark it at the top with handler. And then when we want to query that handler, we just say get item.handler, and then that will allow us access to call that handler, and everything else gets done kind of behind the scenes in a source generated way. We do support adding cross-cutting behaviors. So again, logging, authentication, authorization, those kinds of things. You can also do behavior can also be filtered by interface. So you can say, I want to do a behavior that only applies to requests that look like this, that have this particular interface, and they only get applied automatically to those particular interfaces. Oh, my cat, this one, let's see here. Oh yeah, this is Moon. Because it's source generated, because it's hi there. Because it's source generated, because it is all connected together with strong types, navigate to, find reference, F12, all of those work exactly as you would expect. You can hit F12 on a handler and you can go to the source generated code and see everything that it's doing. And then you can get back to the handle async from there. So you have that strong connection, that compile time connection to see from start to finish what is my code doing. And there's also AOT support for the people that have that need. Once you have a handler, then the question becomes, how do I connect it to endpoints? Well, that's what we wrote immediate.apis for. And what immediate.apis does is it connects a handler to an endpoint. One of the things after we wrote immediate.handler, we said, okay, well, now we have all of these controllers that look exactly the same. Okay, all they do is get a handler and call a handler. Well, let's separate that. Let's automate that. Get rid of the boilerplate. So now to create an endpoint, all you have to do is take a handler, add the map get or map post or map put attribute, and it automatically gets generated as a minimal API endpoint. It gets registered with minimal APIs automatically, and then now you have this connection to say it will automatically show up as a public endpoint. Then, of course, once we started doing that, are there limitations to the source generator? Can you reuse shared behavior? Yes. You can reuse shared behaviors across a package. In fact, that's really the recommended way to do it. Is what you do is you start with a behavior is meant to be a cross-cutting concern. So you write a behavior once and you consume it automatically across all of the behaviors, all of the handlers, or across all of the handlers that inherit a particular interface automatically. So once we wrote the APIs, we said that we really wanted to kind of review how validations are done. And what the validations do, and again, if you want to use Fluent validations, by all means, this is kind of our approach to validation instead. We do use attributes. These look similar to the data annotations attribute, but we have written our own. We do have support for adding custom attributes if you want to implement your own attribute for to validate certain things. But the idea there is that you just add validate to your request and an iValidation target, and then that will automatically get picked up with a by the validation behavior. And now that's something that you can do once. You can create link the behavior once, and now every handler that had that validate attribute, that had that iValidate target, will automatically get a validated, on the back end automatically. Duke had an example. And the last thing we added is, like I said, this is still in pre-release, but I think we're almost done. It's immediate.cache, and this one is the only one that's not source generated, and that's really just because it is a collection of base classes rather than needing source generation. But the idea here is that are they separate NuGet packages? Yes, there are 4 NuGet packages, and I'll show you those in the demo in just a second. So the idea here is that what you do is you can automate connecting the results of a handler or the calling of a handler with iMemory cache. And this base class will automatically protect against calling the handler more than once. So if you have a handler that takes 3 seconds, you say, you don't want to worry about putting it what you can do is you can say, this will automatically protect against hitting all of the running that more than once at a time. It'll say, and this is separated by request. So requests for 1 versus a request for 2 will still be allowed to run. But if you have 3 requests for 1, they will all be streamlined to a single handler call, and all get answered at the same time. And we do support invalidation and setting values if you need to. I have thought about creating a single NuGet package that has all of them. I haven't found the need to yet, but I'm not opposed to that idea. If that's something that people want, I can definitely create an immediate platform NuGet package that handles all of them. All right. So I'm going to switch over to the Visual Studio if Brainiac is available. There we go. So what I've done here is I have created I started with a very simple web application. If you look in my NuGet packages, I only have API and Swashbuckle. It's just a standard template for the database. I am not doing anything fancy. I'm not connecting to a real database. I'm just doing everything with JSON. The idea here is just that I want to kind of get started and focus on the important parts. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add NuGet packages here. I'm just going to search for ImmediatePlatform. Of course, the one thing that I tested earlier did not work. So now, well, okay then. We're going to copy and paste from NuGet then. Let's see here. So here we go, immediate handlers. We're going to immediate APIs. Oh, that's why I'm doing. Oh, that's it. Okay, thank you for pointing that out. Yes, there we go. Immediate validations and immediate cache. So now we can go back to program and we can start to see if we're going to create. So this is where we start getting into how this connects into vertical slice architecture. We talked a little bit how the no controllers and no NuGet packages. That's correct. We started talking about how these are how this fits into these handlers fit into use cases and feature. One of the things what we start to see is that the way I look at these handlers is every handler becomes an independent. Everything around is readable. Okay, well then I will, let's see here. I cannot blow that up. Okay. Well, okay. That is it. Let me see here. Let me, can I do that in fonts and settings? I don't believe I can. Okay. All right, I can't blow that up. I'm sorry. We're going to add a new class. And then we're just going to say get to-dos. And then we're going to say static partial. We're going to add the partial ahead of time. We're just going to say handler, and it automatically adds our namespace. And we're going to say public sealed record query. And we're going to get all of our handlers. We're going to say public sealed record. Right again, yes. Response. We're going to say we want to get required I read only list of to do, and we're going to do's. To do ID, get init, public required string comment, and public required bool is completed. And then we're going to say private static async value task response handle async. We're going to add our query. We're going to add our DB context. And now the nice thing about doing it this way is that this DB context will automatically come from the DI system. So you don't have to do any fancy magic to inherit this from the DI. You don't have to worry about connecting it. You just say, hey, I want to get this from the DI system, and it will automatically take care of it in the background. We're going to add our cancellation token, and we're going to say return context dot to-dos dot to list dot select to support the injection attributes. Yes, it does. It actually does. That was a recent add as well. So if you need to, no, Duke, he's talking about stuff that's coming from MSDI. The from services is something that gets added. We'll talk about that in immediate.apis in just a minute. So we're going to do new to do. Oh, I need you to stay down. Is completed. So now we're going to save this. And so far, this has been unused. But once we save it, it starts to read it. And now you can see that it started picking up that this is being used. There's a reference here. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the reference here. If we go to the caller, we'll start to see this is our code that we generated here. With the same partial class as get to-dos. Shortcut to automatically define the handler. Salman, I guess I'd be curious what you're talking about there, because the idea is that this does automatically do that. So then we say, okay, we've got our behaviors here. So if we want to do behaviors, we'll start to see all of that stuff here. And then here's our context. So we can get our stuff from the DI system. And then we start to call our methods. So this whole thing starts to work magically, and it all does this. Now, if we go back to our program, this is stuff that we've got to do every time. We've got to do once builder.services.add web application handlers. Come on. we're not in the right. We got to using web application 1, and then services add web application behaviors. So now we've added our stuff to the DI system as well. Well, the async is not there because this is just a JSON thing that returns IEnumerable. It doesn't have a and the autocomplete didn't work because I didn't have does it wrap it in a value task? Also sync. Yes, sync calls are so this. There are two ways you could do it. You could either do async here, or you could do value task dot from result here. But value task is always required, and the reason is because the value task is how we connect. We don't want to have multiple interfaces, multiple base classes for the behavior that separate for sync and async. So everything is considered to be async if you need to. Do I need to wrap it in? Yes, I do. We're going to do that. And there we go. So now the only comment is that it lacks a weight. That's correct. So this is how we create a handler. And now we have something that this can be used by any other handler in the system. This becomes a self-contained component that other parts of the system can use. That other part may be a controller, it may be a fast endpoint, it may be just another handler. So I may create one handler and I may rely on that from another handler. But regardless, this thing is self-contained. Part of that is that this handle async is private, so we can only connect about this through the handler system. So we enforce that separability, and it's all being managed by source control. It's all being managed automatically. So now we want to say we want to get an endpoint. So now we can say, hey, let's do an endpoint. Let's do map get, and we're going to say /API/ to-dos, and we're going to go back to the program. It's something you only have to do once, but you do need to do it, and say, okay, we're going to say app.mapWeb endpoints, and now we have our endpoints. And I believe I'm sharing just the screen and not the API, so I can't. So if I hit F5, it's going to do stuff, but I can't show you what the F5 is doing. But the idea here is that these endpoints will now become automatically lit up for Swagger. They're automatically available to the system. Everybody can now, the world can now access this endpoint, and we did so with a single line of code here. Now I'm gonna add one more endpoint here. Use an HTTP file. That's a good idea. Here we go. So now we're gonna say API / get to-dos, and then let's see here. Did that? I have not worked with the web. Let's see here. If I send this, did that work? In theory, that should be returned a single. Well, they're compiled. Oh, okay. There's. I do not see. Let me run that real quick, just to make sure. How do I deal with authentication policies, that kind of stuff? So I'll show you that in just a second here. Okay, so that does work. API too. Okay. 5.2. So that's it. So there are two ways that I can deal with. So with authentication and policies, then I can do the same thing I would normally do. I just go up here. I say authorize, and then I want to say policy equal authentication. I say to-do policy, and then that will work automatically. And that gets hooked in. So one of the things that we can take a look at here and say, we're going to say find all references, which is going to be way too small, but I'm going to show you. See here, where's the oh yeah, here we go. So the route builder. So now what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we have our route builder, we have our endpoints, and you see that adding this require authorization, it automatically copy that over, and now we have something that can do. If you need more custom stuff, one of the things that we do support, if we go in here, if you do, we can add our customized endpoint, and so you can you have access to the endpoint directly. So if you want to modify that, or there's also access to the missing transform result, so you can add a transform result that does that as well. You can hook into, or the other thing you can do down here is add IHTTP contact successor if you need to access that directly in here. Or the other thing you can do, and we'll go ahead and do this real quick. We'll go ahead and add I'm going to add a shared behavior here, just so that we can start talking about what these behaviors look like. Nope. I'm going to add a folder for behaviors. Oh, whoops, this should have been endpoints. Add endpoints. We're going to move that in there. Yes, we do have a repo. If you want to, there's a VSA template. Let me pull that up real quick. Here's my my fancy example that anybody can rely on. And it's still a fairly basic to-do list, but it's got a lot of the framework that I like to use when I do stuff. One of the things I hoped to do this week, I didn't have time to, is so I'll probably do over the month of December, in between Advent of Code, is to create a copy of the eShop example, because I think that'd be a good comparison of how that works on the. Oh, yep, that one's Moon sitting over here. So if we have so I'd like to be able to have that as a comparison for people to say, hey, here's the Aspire version of eShop, here's the clean architecture version, and oh, here's my immediate platform version of it as well. So we're going to add a quick, just a quick behavior. I'm going to add a to-do behavior. Hi there, kitty. I don't need you to sit on my shoulder right now. Okay, so we're going to do T request, T response, and we're going to say this is going to inherit from behavior T request, T response, which means that we have to implement the, and we're just going to, for the moment, we're just going to return next. And the idea there is that, is we can do any behavior that we want to. So the nice thing is we can make this async and do await here. And if we want to do stuff before, we can say, so if we want to say logging, we can do console.writeLine, which you should never do in an application, but JSON serializer.serialize, we can do that if we want to. We can do var response equal, we can do console.writeLine response, and then return the response. And the idea there is that now we have something that we can say, hey, we want to modify the behavior. We can do some authentication. You can do that. If you want to do authorization, you can do that. If you want to do some sort of necessary steps, you can add that into here, and it'll get automatically handled for multiple handlers that this gets applied to. Not critical. Will you add minimal API grouping to IA? I have an open request to update IA to support automatically generating the URL based on the file path, but I haven't done that yet. How am I integrating AI into my solution? No. Behavior. Adding behavior to a handler will discard. Add behavior before or after. The head on fire, that's number 2 of the great question. Go ahead and add that as an issue on the IA or on the IH repository, and I'd be glad to consider doing that. I haven't done that yet, but that's an interesting idea to do that. So now I'm just going to do this temporarily. I'm just going to do this here. So for this becomes something we can do here, and we'll do type of to-do behavior. And now, if we go look at this method here, find out where it's being referenced. If you go look at the reference, we can see that we now have this to-do behavior that's being included as well. It gets connected in, it's automatically called. And the other thing is that since this is also dependent on DI system, we can receive our if we need to receive an IHTTP context accessor here, we can do so. And then at this point, now if we want to do any sort of processing based on the HTTP request, we have access to it right here automatically. And so we can even do behavior processing based on the HTTP request that's coming in and have that applied to multiple endpoints. And this again is connected automatically through the DI system. Now, let me add another endpoint. Let me actually, before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and take this, and I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to say assembly. Oops, get rid of the unnecessary brace and add that in. And now this becomes something that and then because I'm importing validation, I need to go ahead. It's reminding me that, hey, I should probably go ahead and add in validation behavior as well. And so now if I go back, so now since I've done this assembly wide, if I go back here, I can take a look here and I can see find all references, go back to the caller, and I can see that now I am receiving both the, save it all, let it update real quick. Should be. It's taking its sweet time. We'll get that. Okay. Let me go ahead while that's working in the background. Let me go ahead and add another class here. We're going to do get item to do by ID. And how are we doing on time? We said 12:30. Okay. We're going to do that. We're going to say here, we're going to say handler. We're going to add a handler. We're going to do static partial, public sealed request or record. And then we're going to add our response. We're going to copy this over and use that as our response. And then we're going to say private static async value task. Steve Jobs did get, yeah, there you go. To do, we're going to say, hey, we're going to do a query, DB context, concurrency token, or cancellation token. Context return. Context.todos.where query.id. For the moment, I'm just going to assume that it exists. Return new. We're going to do to.id comment equal is completed to completed. Complete that. Okay. We're not doing async. Oh, right. So now we're going to say new to do. Why are you complaining about this? The required comment must be set. Oh, because I have an extra in. There you go. Typos. So now we have this endpoint, and the reason I wanted to add this one is because now this endpoint becomes something that needs to have validation on it. So we want to say here, we're going to add map get. We're going to say /API /todo/todo ID. And now one of the things I want to point out here is that we do get our syntax highlighting for routes, which is nice. This will automatically tie into the handler, into the property there. We're going to say here, we're going to add validate. And then we can go over here and add validation target there. And then we're going to say that will clean up in just a minute. And we want to say greater than 0. And now when we do this, partial. And the nice thing is that now we'll automatically get an error. So, because this is already marked as because it's marked as an validation target, this will automatically get called by the behavior, and now we will get an exception on this endpoint if we pass in a to-do ID that's less than 0. And so what I'll do is I'll point that out. We'll say go find all references, and we will see that now we have included both the validation behavior and to-do behavior, and we are calling them in order from outside to in. Outside to in, and we're calling them, and we're getting and so now we can validate our response as well. I will hand the response streaming over to Sasson. There you go. So why do I need validate if I have that? That's a really good question. That's a technical concern that we kind of through the system is that the behavior system, because of how it operates, requires that we, in order to find ways to filter, must filter on an interface. Because what we do with filters, we say, what I can do here is I can say, hey, where T request, I validation target, T request. That's how we say that we only want this behavior to operate for particular types of requests. That's our because that's part of the type system that it has to be an interface and not an attribute. We need to have that validation target interface there. However, on the flip side, for generating the validation code, we need to have it as an attribute so that the source generator can pick it up. That's part of how the Roslyn source generator rely on interface on attributes for the most performant access to a particular type. So in order to do that, we really need both. We need both the attribute and the validation target. And we'll look in here. We can say, see here, go to response, find all references, and we can now see that there's a IV. We can see that now we have all of our validation code. Oh, that's a good. I'll sit up here. There you go. Hopefully that doesn't lean back as much. There we go. So we'll see that we do our null check. We see that we validate our to-do ID, and we're checking for whether or not it's greater than 0, and then we can add our error there. So this is all, again, source generated. It's all AOT compatible. It's all performant. It's all there's no runtime reflection. There's no it just automatically there's the chair. So that's IV. That's immediate.validation. So getting back to this idea of how this connects with vertical slice architecture, it's this idea that everything is separated into components. So now we have this get to do by ID component. We have this get to do's component. And now if I need to do something else that relies on get to do's, I can do so. And it becomes something I don't have to pass anything in other than the query, and everything else gets taken care of automatically through the DI system and through its own internal mechanism. And I can create these building blocks. So these start, so a single handler here, an IH handler starts as a use case. It might start as a map get interface use case. It might start as a and then, this becomes useful. I can use this for multiple things. Oh, I want to use this handler for both an endpoint and a Blazor handler, so I can use it on a Blazor page. Okay, now we start to move it from a single use case to a feature handler, where it start to use by multiple things. And then as we graduate, okay, it becomes useful for multiple parts within the system. We can add more. They can call it, and now it becomes more of a domain level handler that begins used by all the different features for whatever it needs to be used. And then if we have cross-cutting behavior, we can pull that in through the to-do behavior. I think that's the end of everything that I wanted to say. So anybody else has any other questions? We are right at an hour, which is perfect. So if anybody else has any other questions, anything else they want to see, I'd be glad to finish that up in the next 5-10 minutes. Otherwise, I will go ahead and see here. Why should I consider IA over implementing VSA without these libs? That's a really good question. I think the biggest thing for me is that this two things. One is that IH and IA are all, a large part of it is about removing boilerplate. Yeah. So there's more boilerplate without these libraries. You kind of separate, you kind of simplify it. You saw how easy it is to add an endpoint. This is all we need to do if we want to create an endpoint, and the rest of it gets handled automatically. The other benefit that I see in this is that it becomes something that I talked about, these building blocks, these components. And that's what these do. They became these isolated building blocks. And I can say, okay, now I've got these foundational building blocks. I can build more building blocks on top. And if I need to build this around, I can do that. Can we expect content around the platform in the future? Blog videos. We have the website, which has been linked a couple times. I am not very good at creating that kind of content. I wish I were good at it. Maybe if Nick Chopsas wants to watch this video and create his own video to become an evangelist of the Immediate platform, I would greatly appreciate it. Like I said, I think in the month of December, I'm going to try to create an eShop, not a competition, but a comparison. And if I do that, then that would be an example of something that we can have see the comparison and see the potential of Immediate platform to kind of do what it needs to do. Beyond that, I don't really. Lane question: good path to introduce oneself to that way of designing. There's a lot of hidden. Well, I think what I would start with is, it took me a while to get around it too. That's not a lame question. That's a really good question. It took me a while to get around it too. What really kind of opened my brain up to understanding this way of doing things is to start thinking of service, to stop, almost get rid of services. So instead of services, do handler. We say, hey, here we go. We're going to, each handler now becomes each service method, something that used to be a service method. So, used to have controllers that, had 5 methods. Okay, you have your get, you have your post, you have your, whatever. And then they call the get, they call the save, they call the whatever. And then, now what you do is you take, those ideas and say, okay, I'm going to separate those. Don't worry about behaviors. Don't worry about what's going on behind. Don't worry about just do a handler without anything and say, hey, here you go. I'm gonna create a single handler that does this endpoint, the get endpoint. I'm going to create a single handler that does the save endpoint, and that does these different things. And then you start to work with that. And then as you start to understand what that component does by itself, then you can start to introduce behavior that say, hey, let's automate some of this stuff. Oh, I am doing this same check against whether this user has access to this to-do item in these 5 handlers. Let me create a behavior that applies to these 5 and does that. But that's not, you can't, in my view, that's something, just like vertical slice architecture is emergent complexity, that would be the same thing for you in learning is emergent complexity. Start with the simple cases, focus on a single handler that only does one thing, and then start to build from that into understanding a larger system. So I think it's a really good question. Yes. I think you and I have already had conversations on your abstraction principle versus my abstraction principle. You can make that a repository for the handler. That's correct. You can if you want to. That's we're gonna reject it. I'm going to push against it with every fiber of my being in my projects because it doesn't make sense to me. The handler should have direct access to the database. Rely on integration testing. Use test container. Because again, those are simpler, those are faster, those are faster to develop, those are, whatever. But if you want to, you can, if that makes sense to you. But again, it's all about this emergent complexity, emergent abstraction. Do it as you need to rather than enforcing that complexity up front. In this way, you kind of get things done, and then you see, hey, where does this abstraction make sense? Hey, now I'm seeing in this case, I do the same thing slightly differently in these different ways. Let me add an abstraction for that. Let me add an interface that does this in two different implementations that do it in different ways so that we can do that. But that's something, to me, that's a secondary step when it's necessary rather than a first step. Yes, I would agree with that. If implemented properly, you should have as minimal features or as minimal connections between, that's exactly right. I agree. You would not endorse that normally, but that's something that, within a single feature, that to me, that's what I fought against for so long. And I spent so much time writing those abstractions that I realized that I never actually needed. And so I wanted to get away from doing that. Brainiac, you asked about MSAL. Where is that? To authenticate. There'd be no roadblocks if you wanted to authenticate with Active Directory. And in fact, IA expects you to rely on the ASP.NET Core authentication. We're not introducing anything as far as the authentication goes. All we're doing is introducing steps for authorization. So less about who are you and more about whether you have access to do it. So who you are, that's still part of, and that's one of the things we really wanted to do is to avoid rewriting the framework. We didn't want to get into this realm where where like the other frameworks where we're going to rewrite everything. We're going to have something, you have to use our validation library. You have to use our thing, Instead, we're going to say, here's our foundation, immediate.handlers. If you want to only use that, use that. And then if you want to write controllers, write controllers. You want to use fast endpoint, use fast endpoint and connect in. Or you can rely on our ecosystem and rely on our API and connect with minimal API. You can rely on our validation library. You can rely on our caching library, and those just work automatically. Those are more natural. But the point is to be flexible, a little bit more plug and play with any of this. Maximum coupling is more of a shock value. The better word is coupling as necessary. Cohesion would be I do not have, I don't know. Not in this example here. Let me look on the, Trace, do you remember in the cookbook if there was one with controllers? Again, controllers would be very simple. I can just add one here real quick. Add controllers. And notice that this is not going to in any way interfere with what we're doing on that side. You say, okay, we're going to do an empty controller. And then what we're going to do here, we're just going to say get to-dos.handler. And then we're going to return view. I don't use controllers, so I don't remember what the exact, but we're just going to say wait. So it should that just becomes what. That's really all it is. Microphone model. The microphone is a built-in laptop microphone. I do have a separate MX Brios camera that I bought for this, but I'm not using a special camera. So the sorry, how would immediate cache? It does no immediate cache does not rely on it does not rely on the iHybrid. It only relies on iMemory cache. That's something I talked about. I discussed, and we're still in pre-release, so that may be something that changes. But right now, it's not something that I feel like. It's hard to know what the right answer is for caching for hybrid. And I know what the right answer for caching. So iMemory. So we're just going to get to do cache. We're just going to say here. We're going to say here. Application cache base. We're going to do iMemory cache here. I get owned iMemory iHandler. Get to dos dot request. Query. And then we're going to pass that into the base class. Duke. I'll do that in just a second. That's a good application cache base. Oh right. Let me copy this in real quick. And then we're gonna implement the necessary. We're just gonna say there are obviously a variety of ways that you could do this. Most likely, what you would do is you would do this based on a specific value within the request, but you can do kind of whatever you need to do. But that's all it takes to create a cache. You just inherit, you pass up the necessary thing, and again, this all goes in with. I'm going to add something here real quick. I'm going to add in. This is auto register inject, one of my favorite libraries by Patrick. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say register singleton. And then I'm going to go up here and say builder. And so then now this thing is automatically registered singleton. It automatically get this. It automatically goes through there. Setting expiration that could you have a behavior that looks at it and sets it? No. Right now that's a good idea. I might be open to understanding that, but right now the cache entry, the expiration is all done effectively statically. We do this once in this area that says this is how we're going to define the cache entry. The name is auto register inject. It's right here. There you go. Okay. Owned. We got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to answer. Okay, good. Okay, 3 minutes left. I'm going to answer this, and then any other questions I'll do in the Discord. So owned is a concept that I introduced with the caching. Is basically what it does is it automatically creates a single short-term scope for that object. So the idea is that what's inside the owned is something that is a scoped service from DI that needs a lifetime, and we may not have that lifetime in, for example, a single in a singleton class. So what we're going to do is this owned will say it's basically the same concept as an iServer scope factory, and that's what it uses internally. It's just doing so on an automated basis, on a type safe way. So we can say, hey, I know that I'm going to get this particular one thing, and I'm going to do it really quick in the right way. Let me go get the hat real quick. I'll be right back. There we go. There's my hat. And the cats all left. I opened the door and they left. All right. I think that Brainiac needs to run, so I think we're going to call it there. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask me in the Discord, and we'll go from there. Thanks, guys.